Good afternoon. Glad to be here. Excited to finally be here on video with my buddy Gary Wayne. We've been doing long time streams since about 2015, I think. And today, we decided to start doing live streams on YouTube as well to maybe get a little bit more Q&A and interaction with the fans and everything as well. So we're going to do that. And I'm excited to be here, Gary. It's a pleasure to have you here, buddy. How's it going?
So happy to be here today. It's going well, and all things considered, and the events that are going around. But no, I'm hanging in there well, and I'm staying busy. And I'm one of those guys who, no matter what's going on, I can find a way to continue to work. And and I'm also spending a lot of time on writing the book. It's taking way longer than I thought, but it's going to be out this year for sure, hopefully by the midpoint. And it's a lot of fun in writing it. It's really going well.
Well, I'm excited to see about your new book for sure. I'm excited about that. And it's always a pleasure to have you on. And we got a chat room here going on on YouTube as well. So we're going to take questions. Guys, I see you guys coming in the chat room now. I'm really happy to be here with Gary Wayne today. And you guys can find Gary at Genesis6conspiracy.com. Of course, Gary is the creator of this amazing book and series that's coming out. And you can find Gary, of course, wherever books are sold and at Genesis6conspiracy.com. And he has a book, of course, by the same name. And today, let's dive right into it. I mean, I thought a really good topic that we could start on, and not many people talk about, is the transformations that possibly could have happened, especially to the elite, the Pharoahs and different bloodlines, elite bloodlines. And it's quite possible that these Nephilim bloodlines were aware of the deluge is coming and might even installed certain locations and certain technologies here to make sure that their death transformation was ensured, and they would be able to have certain powers in the afterlife, especially when it's related to earthborn Rephaim possibly as well, and their connection to our realm. How do you feel about that? Because I know it's sort of speculation in some ways, but it's my belief that some of these pharaohs transformed into these hyperdimensional beings that are infecting the minds of humanity.
Yeah, so a lot of things that you sort of encapsulated in there. So I think everything that you're talking about is not necessarily speculative. I think there's a lot of information that's out there that brings you to that sort of conclusion, and then it's a matter of understanding what does that all mean. But if we look at, did they know the flood was coming? And so we're talking about the antediluvian pharaohs, the antediluvian Nephilim, and all the other kings and of the different civilizations before the flood. We know that from a biblical perspective, that Noah would have been building the ark, and he would have been communicating with the giants and telling them that a flood is going to come unless you repent. And we get that, recorded in the Quran that he actually did that. We get that in all sorts of other accounts that come out of different sources outside the Bible. But just the actions in the Bible suggest that he was communicating to that. In the book of Giants, or is it, trying to think, is it the book of Giants? It's in one of the second, third, or book of Giants that Enoch is sent for and summoned and talked to by some of the giants, like a Gilgamesh that's involved there. So there's an antediluvian Gilgamesh as well, by the sounds of it. And, the sons of the fallen angel Shemyaza, Ohia, and I'm trying to think of the other one, Ogaiges, maybe it is. It's similar to that, Ogaya, something to that effect. And talking about this dream that they have. I think Mawe is involved as well in that account.
Weren't they one time were they even like begging Moses for like begging him for like forgiveness or something, or for him to help?
That's Moses is after the flood. So
I mean Enoch, I'm sorry.
Oh, absolutely.
Enoch.
They were hoping to avoid the flood somehow, some way, and they're told, no, it's coming. So it's just a matter of sort of what you do. And they're seeing these visions and dreams, and it's confirmed. So then they're going to take that information.
They were telling Enoch they were going to reform. Like, I'll reform. I'll be better.
Yeah.
Like, just,
Yeah, but it's too late. And so they're going to do things to prepare for that. And one of the things that we get that particularly comes out of secret societies and the Gnostics and the Freemasons and all of those associations is that they decided to do a number of things. One is to leave irrevocable signs that there was this very advanced, powerful civilization that was wiped out by the flood. So they built markers like Stonehenge, they built markers like the pyramids, Machu Picchu, all of these things around the world so that there couldn't be this sort of erasing of their history and their civilization. They wanted it to be remembered. So if they're going to do all of that, one would presume that they're going to do everything to try and survive themselves or evolve or somehow in a different dimension, in a different spiritual form, survive. Well, we already know from the Nephilim and the Rephaim after the flood is that their bodies were not immortal. They may have been at the beginning, but Genesis 6:3 says life was limited to 120 years. So their bodies were going to die. And so the spirits were not going to go to sleep because they're not humans. And humans have to wait for a resurrection, but their bodies are either going to go into heaven, which they're not permitted to do, to wander the earth, or to wander and go back and forth between the underworld, but avoid the abyss, where many of them, the most terrible of them, are locked in. Like the terrible ones that are talked about in Ezekiel 32 that are talking to the Pharaoh. Incidentally, you're using the word Pharaoh. So there's just bringing in sort of the biblical sort of connections to underline what you're talking about. But this is after the flood. So they need some knowledge. They need to develop something with the religion that's been developed from the sciences and the knowledge from the gods as to how to navigate the underworld. So that they're not going to go to the abyss and that they can be on earth, whether it's at certain periods or times or not, so that they're not in this horrible place, because the abyss prisons is a horrible place of waiting for judgment. And so, yes, I think when we put all of that together is that they did do something in preparation for that.
I agree 100%. I think actually it was a multitude of things, most likely, that they did. And one of them, and I'm interested on your opinion of this, is most likely they were ingesting some sort of either powder or as well as fluid intelligence, as we've talked about before, as starfire.
Yes.
And which is, I know it's pretty, extreme to talk about here on live video, but we're talking about a ritual that has been carried over, and sometimes, I don't even think we can even go back as far as this is implanted in our consciousness, this type of information. So when we're talking about drinking, the menstrual blood, I mean, this is serious information here, and it's where the Rosicrucian name comes from, right? It's where the Rosicrucians from, the fiery red cross.
Yes.
So do you think that's possible that they were ingesting maybe even like a monatomic gold that had bacterias of the ancients in it, and even blood that's carrying the DNA of the ancients?
So what we do know is that in the seven sciences and the mysticisms, there's a discipline that is held by the Rosicrucians, which is alchemy, which makes all sorts of elixirs and looking for immortality and things like that. So that's a specialty in the science that even carries on today, that would go back to these antediluvian giants and the religion and the development of their knowledge. We also know that the Nephilim drank blood to extend their lives and to increase their cognitive abilities and probably spiritual abilities to make contact into other realms. And we also know that, and this may be an allegory that comes down, like in the times of Egypt and with Hathor, there was this blood beer mixture. And then in places like Atlantis, there was blood and wine, and in other Scythian and Aryan cultures, there's this similar kind of mixing, and that alcohol content might be an allegory for something else that is being added that comes from alchemy, which is, alchemy comes from the word chem, of the chem of Mendes, meaning black, as in the black dark sciences of the occult, and that Azazel, who provided most of the knowledge and is the scapegoat and is depicted as a goat in occultism, he is the goat of Mendes in Egypt, where alchemy seemingly was developed by the Egyptian knowledge and religion. So I think what all of that is telling us is, yes, they were trying to not only extend their spiritual safety, but also an ability to maybe extend their life. And also one other thing that they were doing that most people don't connect is that they were mummifying the bodies. They wanted the bodies so that they weren't going to decay, not necessarily as a preservation of who they were, but in hopes that they could find a way to perhaps resurrect their body so they could interact in the physical world again.
Take myself off mute. Yeah, wow. Yep. There's really a lot of information in there, and
yes,
it's interesting. We got some questions too. So I don't know if we should go deeper into that, or we should field some of the questions and wait. How do you want to do this?
Well, I think we should take the questions as they kind of come up, and then just sort of keep moving the conversation along. I mean,
all right. So we got we'll do it in order here. So the first, guys, you can ask Gary anything as well. We don't even have to stick to the topic. We can go deep into this. So, well, one of them is by Riley Rage. They're saying, is Earth a Babylonian prison planet?
Well, that's a good question. In the polytheist perspective, Earth is a prison. And you get that allegory in the Matrix, right? That this is also a projection within the occult arts of geomancy. This is like a computer projection, and it reflects what's going on in heaven will happen on earth. So part of that heaven on earth thing. The other part is that in the polytheist belief system is that the God of the Bible is an evil God who does that imprisoning so that people worship him and not the other angels that are equal to him, as polytheism believes, not as monotheism believes, because they believe God is the omnipotent God, and that God of the Bible is the one who does not want to provide knowledge to humankind and to keep them in ignorance, whereas polytheism believes is the seven wandering stars, the pantheon that's in most all cultures, and all the other fallen angels are there to provide humankind with knowledge so that they can evolve into godhood, is the eventual sort of end game to the provision to the knowledge. So from polytheism's perspective is, yes, the earth is a prison. From a Christian belief system, it is a similar one, but with some nuances to it, that this is not our home, that this is a place where we do not belong, but it's part of the process as a resolution to the angelic rebellion, which will complete in the end time so that we can be resurrected into heaven and into eternity and be given bodies that can be like the resurrected body of Jesus, that can go between heaven and earth and any other dimension. Whereas today, the spirits can't necessarily do that in a physical form. They can take a physical form in the physical world, but they can't take that physical form into the spiritual world. And only Jesus' resurrected body was able to do that. And we're going to be resurrected to be like him, is the Christian belief. So you get that kind of nuance, but there's a different lens that's looked through the prison concept of the earth. And so, and with two different outcomes for the two different belief systems.
Thank you. I had a problem with my camera. My camera actually fell. So
yes, we are experiencing gremlins today. Obviously, this is something that people want to keep us off balance today, so that we don't give give good answers to the questions that people have. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, the camera's broken. It fell and it's busted. So I got to switch to the camera of the laptop and see if that works.
Oh, that works good. That's good.
Let's see if this works a little bit better. Yeah, the camera's busted. So I don't know
Wow.
if the green screen is gonna look good on this like this.
The
Like
green screen is fine.
it's not going in and out.
No, we've got a complete space background with like an asteroid going through, and then there's this green blob that's in on the right, that's sort of like the
Oh
northern
yeah,
lights that flashes in and
that's
out.
what's yeah, that's unfortunately broken now.
Oh, okay. I thought that was like the northern lights type of thing. So
Yeah, the USB camera, my regular camera is.
Yep. Okay.
Oh wait, there it goes. I think it's actually working now. No, it's broken. This thing is busted. Yep, let me see. All right, so we'll actually let me switch.
Well, give
We'll
me
stay
the
with-
next question, and we'll let you get reset up.
Yeah, okay, here we go.
That looks good.
Yeah, I just got to take it off the one setting so it doesn't have that green stuff
Yeah.
going on. All right, so we got more questions for Gary here. Here we go. Oh, well, this is an interesting question, and to also go into what you were talking about before. I mean, it seems that we have a lost coordinate almost to who we are, right? It's almost like even society, like we're living in this 3D construct where we're almost, people are feeling like we're confined to this reality, almost prisoned, sometimes in this reality. And I think we are literally embedded in the very coordinate that we should be searching for.
Yes.
Right. And instead of having some sort of middleman device, stargates, all these creations like CERN and all these different things, I think that they're making like a middleman to try to get to a higher dimension that we already have embedded within us.
Yeah. It's almost like there's been other things tried before, and now all sort of contact has stopped to let this period play out. So we had an age where the angels walked amongst us. We had an era where there was portals. You could go back and forth. You had all of this unlimited knowledge that was coming. And now we're in this period where it's like, this is another stage, but it is to show that the same thing's going to happen no matter what happens. And so no matter what is tried. So I think it's part of that complete process. And I was thinking a little bit earlier, and I didn't get it in, is that in the Ugaritic texts, in terms of being able to go back and forth into dimensions, not only did the Baalim, the gods of Mount Hermon that are talked about, that like Amaru and Ashtaroth and Baal and all the other gods that are listed in there, they would go back and forth between this dimension and the underworld. And so did the Rephaim kings after the flood. And they could do that even before they died. But certainly when they got into the funeral rituals, they were trying to ensure a navigation for safety into the underworld that was knowledge only provided for the kings and or the pharaohs. And so I think that really sort of underlines what we were talking about earlier, is that the reincarnation rituals, which is sort of reserved for the elite, is more about the bloodlines of these giants and how they're going to navigate after their death through the underworld and not fall prey to being put into the abyss. I think that's what that secret hidden knowledge that they secret within the adept confines of the upper end of the secret societies and occult religions.
I agree with you as well. And it's interesting too, because when we talk about sort of these stargates and everything that's on this planet, I mean, it's almost like it's not even meant, like it's a dimension we're not meant to be part of, worlds that we're not supposed to be part of, that we're opening up holes to.
Right. And a lot of the gods that are depicted in the pantheons around the world, they are the god of the underworld, and that's the main dimension that's being talked about. And in the underworld, that's known biblically as Sheol. It's known in Greek as Hades. It can be called the otherworld, the netherworld. It can be called Anwin. there's so many different names to it, but it doesn't seem to be physically in the earth. It seems to be in another dimension. And so if you now connect what we're talking about in terms of the rapiu of the Ugaritic text, there's another site that's a little bit east of there and more towards Mount Hermon, right at the bottom of Mount Hermon on the Golan Heights, which is Gilgal Rephaim, or the wheel of the giants. And there are something like 100 dolmens there, and a dolmen means portal. And so if you Google dolmen or fairy dolmen, because fairy portals is also part of that whole thing, you're going to see these little mini Stonehenge megalith structures that typically are depicted with this, two large standing up stones and then one that sort of comes across. And those were thought to be portals that they would pass through to the underworld on. And there's portals everywhere around the world, and there's more access at certain locations around the world. And so when you hear all of these discussions about going into Argatha or all of these places that are in the middle of the earth, you have these entrances all over the world, but they're all sort of going to the same place. And I don't think they're going into the center of the earth. I think they're actually going into the underworld in a whole different location in a different dimension that takes the same space up.
I agree 100% about that. I really do. 100% about that. And that's also, I think, what's more likely is that as well. So let's also what we got here in the chat room. I'm sorry about my camera, everybody. It literally fell on the floor and broke. So this is an interesting question, and it was prior to what we were getting into. It's this is a main question that I think everybody asks when troubles go in their life, is why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? Why does it feel justice is never served on earth? That there's this battle going on,
Yeah, and there won't be justice served on earth for a while. So my belief is this, and I come from a Christian biases. Everything is played out through free choice. And so originally God created the gods, or the fallen angels as we know them in Christianity, and they were created immortal. They didn't get a choice in that, but they did have free choice after that to follow God or not. And many chose not to a third, as Revelation 12 will talk about. So even though they had intimate knowledge of God and they had immortality, they wanted to live separate from God and away from God, without his laws and without his oversight. So in Isaiah 14:12, you have Satan, who's the leader of that rebellion and who's the god of this world for a while, who the council of gods report to a Psalms 82 and Deuteronomy 32 reference. You have this free choice that is permitted to play out, and they're able to do things in the physical world, not necessarily in the heavenly world, and they can do things in the underworld in another dimension as they choose. And so you have one rebellion, and then you have probably a destruction of the earth, which is a different destruction than the flood. And the resolution to this is to create a set of beings, starting with Adam, who are going to have less knowledge than the angels did, and who are going to have to make a choice as to what they believe, who they want to follow, without that knowledge and without immortality, to somehow achieve immortality. And so both the polytheist religions and the monotheist religions are saying you need to find us and make that choice so that you can have something like godhood, or as we would understand in Christianity, being resurrected into immortality to be like the angels, and then to actually judge the fallen angels that did all the crimes against humanity and the crimes against the laws of creation. So all of this is allowed to be played out so that all the names of the book in the book of life that were written in there before creation are fulfilled. And so it's allowed to play out through free choice. So God is Alpha Omega, knew everything that was going to happen, but only wants followers that are going to choose him. You can't force a religion on people. You can't force a belief system on people. They have to choose. And that's what we're here to do. So what comes along with that free choice, whether it's from the free choice of angels or the free choice of humans, is good things happen and bad things happen. But because God is Alpha Omega, he knows the end from the beginning. So was able to extrapolate all the decisions that were going to be made. And there's a certain period where that's allowed to play out. It's got nothing to do whether or not God takes one side or another side. There may be some intervention here or there, but it's rare. It's about humankind deciding on their own. Are they going to try and create heaven on earth, or are they going to realize that that can't be done, and the only heaven you can achieve on earth will come through God, not through humankind?
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about this, because it seems like even with the free will, even when it comes to fallen angels and demonic entities, we almost seem to have to agree to let them in, to take them on, right?
Yes,
it almost like isn't that they seem to be using that same sort of guideline that, it's like the vampire's at the door, but you gotta
yes,
let him in,
yes. I would put it this way: there is free will by all beings, angels, spirits, and humans, and any other creations, providing you don't cross certain laws, which is what the abyss is for. For those ones who cross that line, angel or giant, if you cross that as a terrible one who did terrible things to humankind while they were on earth and were slain, you're going to go to the abyss. If you're a fallen angel that did crimes against humanity, crimes against creation, like creating the giants and trying to destroy humanity, you're going to the abyss. So there's rules that I think that they kind of have to follow. And in fact, you get an indication from the oath that the angels took on Mount Hermon that they're going to do this and fulfill it no matter the consequences. So they understood the rules, they understood the risks, yet they still did it. And that's something to think about, because the lake of fire and the abyss are two things you really don't want to mess with.
It's something that should be feared in all ways, right?
Yes,
sure.
Yes, you want to avoid it. And just look at Legion when Jesus is dealing with them. They're afraid that he's going to send them to the lake of fire or to the abyss. It's not clear which one that they're afraid of going to before their time.
That's very interesting. It's really intense when you think about some of these sites and what's actually guarding them too. Like you mentioned,
yeah,
you mentioned, Stonehenge and things like that. I think it's natural also to have, maybe if you would say like, earth power, earth vortexes, natural earth power and earth vortexes. I think it's natural to have something like that. And so if there's these natural places of power that installations were made on, right? So most likely there would be guardians of these vortexes, right? There would be installations on magnetic and energetic anomalies that they've made, these dolmen chambers of granite, other places, that have mysterious phenomena, both unseen forces and visible supernatural forces that tend to, be related to these stone structures like stone circles, stone chambers, dolmens, menhirs, cairns, stone effigies, mounds, right? All these. So all over the world, many in England as well, right here, even in the northeast here of New York and the northeast of America here, Ireland, all these places. What's interesting is that they have both little people and giants that are guarding these spots. And I've come to find out in a lot of the experiences that I've researched, and even some of the ones that I've had myself, is that these sites, usually it's the little people that carry the more power, and it seems that the giants are here to protect the little people in some of these cases. There's one story, Gary, that I'd like to share with you real quick before we get back to the questions. It's from Cornwall, where this guy was sort of an I guess you could call him like sort of an exorcist, but I don't know if he follows regular Christian and Catholic exorcism rites, but he was visiting a friend that he had in Cornwall, and he was talking about how this site of natural power, a natural vortex, was sort of calling him. Not necessarily that it was a stone circle, but it was a place of natural power. It was calling him. He just had to go to the site when he visited his friend. So he goes to the site, and basically, and for in Italian, at least in our mythology, they look at it like as the Gregori were install the Filetto or the Filetti, we would call them. These are sort of the Fae, and these locations have guardians like this, of not only the Fae, but giants that are protecting the Fae. So carrying the most important power or data would be these Fae. They would be carrying these vials of life and death right in their possession. These maybe even could be like cometary dust, what they call fairy dust. It could be like carrying interstellar DNA of the ancients, right? So these guardians from this gentleman from Cornwall goes to visit his friend and has to go to this vortex spot. And he said he was just led to it. He didn't know of the spot before. He just had a feeling that he needed to be there. So he has this urge coming over him, and then when he gets there, and it's happened to me before where I felt like I just, even in the freezing cold, where I feel like I need to go to this mountain, or I feel like I need to go here. You get called to somewhere. So these waves of energy were calling him. So he found this place just by following the energy. All right. And he came to this vortex and he began to interface with it. Right. It began to speak to him in a way. And once he began to connect to it, he said, this is very interesting too, that just like the exact image of Saint Christopher with Christ, he said that he saw a giant come out of the vortex, and it had a young creature or being on its shoulders. And this is very an earth vortex power. And he said that it seemed to be that the giant was protecting the child, and what was relayed to him, this small creature or fairy or dwarf that was on the child's shoulders, is that if the giant didn't kept this sort of child well fed and nourished, that the child would start to feed on the humans, right? And it was the child that had this ferocious power, and it was more like a gentle giant that's guarding him, but it had to keep him pleased and fed. What do you hear when you hear that story? Like, what does it make you hear do you think that this is just as straight from Nephilim intelligences, right? This is straight from.
So what we do know is this: it actually makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot more that we don't understand, but we get kind of a general sense of what is going on in that sort of realm, that there is a hierarchy to the gods, just as in the pantheon, and you have the lower gods, and you have it's like they're the host of heaven, which is an army. So there's a rank, and it's one's at the top, and you've got all these different positions, and they're all responsible for different things. That's the spiritual realm, and I think they're quite concerned, as I mentioned earlier, about going to the abyss. So when you look at accounts where in the occult, where we get all of these different kinds of creations from the gods, from the fallen angels, you might get creations like the Gigantes, for example, or the Cyclopean immortals, for example, who also produced offspring. And a lot of these beings that are created from Uranus and Gaia in the Greek mythology, and they have similar accounts in the other pantheons, they create a lot of the weapons for the gods. And as you go further down the rank and into the fairy end of it, that's the elementals, which is typically at the bottom of the hierarchy, a physical being carrying out things in the physical world, but beings in the one category, and there's 4 categories, and they represent like fire, water, earth, and fire, the elements of the world. And the salamanders are a little bit taller, and they're kind of the reptilian beings. And then you've got the little fairies, and they got a whole bunch of different ones in the 3 different columns, and they are like,
and all that, right?
Yeah. You've got mischievous ones like leprechauns, you've got good looking ones, and you've got ugly ones. And particularly in the ugly ones, you've got beings like the dwarves, who live in the ground, and they make weapons for the giants and for the gods. And you have the gnomes that look after the genealogy and the technology and have flying machines and come through fairy portals. You have something assigned to each one of these that are creating things with the technology and the knowledge of the gods that the gods aren't doing themselves. And it's like this: you don't have the fallen angels slandering God. The giants do, the humans do, the polytheist religions do, but the angels don't, because they don't want to violate the rules that they're aware of that, guide their free will. So they have created these other beings that are doing that kind
Like
of stuff
bait.
for them. Yeah.
We're like bait. Let
Yeah.
them do it. Let them do it.
Yeah. And biblically, we know them as the rudiments and the elements in the Bible, and they are part of the hierarchy. And in the occult hierarchy, the elementals are at the bottom of that hierarchy. And the Nephilim would be a little bit higher, but they just have a different role, and they're part of what is being done in the physical world on behalf of the invisible ones. So did we want to take another question, or?
So we have a few of them. I mean, one we've discussed before says, where does RH negative bloodlines come from? I don't know if you want to get into that, but then we have, is the God of the Old Testament different from the New Testament?
Yeah, we can take on both. Let's do the RH negative first.
And then another one is, please discuss the AI rapid infusion into human brains via technology and internet addiction. That's another one.
Oh, that's about 10 shows in itself, but yeah, it's a good question. So the RH negative, where does it come from? It's a very, very good question, and we don't exactly have the specific science to pinpoint it, but we can get a good understanding. And you want to make sure that you don't get caught up in the misinformation argument against it. That because it's RH negative, which means you're missing the D antigen, that you can't add something to the bloodline because something's missing. That's the usual, that's just misinformation for people who haven't dug below the surface. What we do know about RH negative is this, and I'll come back to answering the D antigen in a second, is that about 15% of the population have RH negative blood. And what we do know, it sort of shows up at a period of time that is after the creation of the positive bloodline. And then we also know that there's heavier concentrations around the world, particularly in France and Spain and in England as a general population. And there's a further concentration of RH negative amongst the royals. For example, the Windsor family tends to be O negative, which is the most sought after type of all of the bloods. And the Basques run somewhere, depending on which survey that you're talking about, 50 to 70 to 80% RH negative, and they actually call themselves Homo Atlantis as their species in their mythology, because they say they resettled Egypt, wow, Scythia, and Sumeria and northern Spain after the flood, which is where they sort of come out of nowhere in secular history and are kind of unexplained. So there's this connection to the giants and to the antediluvians through this RH negative blood. The key is not the blood, it's a manifestation of the genes, right? The genes dictate the blood. So it's the gene of Isis that would dictate whether or not you're going to have RH negative blood or not. So I think that's why you have all of these data banks around the world, not only collecting the bloodlines, but the genealogies and DNA technology, so that they can harness the knowledge of who's got that gene of Isis that's going to produce that RH negative bloodline that is not very friendly to RH positive bloodline, especially through the birth process. But there's drugs these days that will take care of it. And the Rh negative bloodline, and I've got a document on this, people, if they want to get a hold of me through my website, Genesis 6, the number 6 conspiracy.com. Just ask for it. I'll send it to you. It gives you the statistics, and it also will provide for you the general traits of those with Rh negative blood. They tend to be paler in skin, hazel eyes, red or blonde hair. They have more intelligence, is what the general thing is. They have more spiritual connections, more connections to aliens, and on and on and on about. That goes back to the patriarchal Nephilim that started their branches, and then back to the fallen angels. I think there's a connection there, and they do like to call it the gene of Isis, which the polytheists say that the word Genesis derives from. That.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It's interesting when you talk about the gene of Isis and the very word Genesis, right? I mean, it's right in there. Even like certain words like that we're using at this time, like reset, right? Look at reset. Is like the sun god, Re, of the god of light. And then you got Set, the god of darkness, colliding with itself, right?
Yeah.
Right in the very word. Even atonement, at one meant. Like there's like these very...
We live submersed into a world that's governed by the fallen angels. And, you know, the word royal, it is Roy as in king from the French, and we'll go back to Latin and back to Hebrew and other language, and Al, which is a transliteration of El, which is an angel or a god in Hebrew. Al in various transliterations around the Middle East could be Il, could be Ilu, could be Al, Allah, as in Allah. It literally means a god generically, or a angel, and when it's capitalized, it would mean the God, like the omnipotent God. And so you have that royale, which is, you know, the descendants of these giants, and that means the kings of God, right? They get their divine right to rule from a specific God in polytheism. From the Baalim after the flood, or Zeus, because they're all the same pantheon after the flood, with the offspring gods. And that you might hear the term Rex Deus or Rex Deus. That means the kings of God as well, that they like to use. And it also has another affinity to people who may have connected some of the Italian sort of connections as it overlaps into the European nobility. It's the black nobility. And the black nobility is like the black arts, and the black chem of Bendes is sort of the understanding that goes along with that, and that occult knowledge of the alchemy that you were referring to.
Yeah, even in Italian, like around Lake Nemi, they have the sacred grove, and the king of the forest originally, which was a giant called Verbius, he would be the Rex Nemorensis, they called it. You know, the guardian of the sacred forest, and eventually I think it's the Pope who took over this title.
Yep.
Right? You know, you have to actually, the one has to die for the next one to come in line, the next Rex Nemorensis, the one hooded one of the forest. Yeah. Right? This is very interesting. So the next question was, let me see what it was. Oh, there's a few really good questions too after that. I don't know. We don't have all day. We could do a series of these shows. So too.
We will.
Yeah.
I think we will.
For sure. So the other one was the God of the Old Testament and New Testament. Are these different gods? That some people feel they are, you know? So
yeah, that is. They are the same God. And so, you know, there's different beings that are talked about that are akin to each other, both in the Old and the New Testament. And you get it backed up also, you know, in the Quran. So you have the Almighty God, you have the Word of God, and you have the Holy Spirit. They're all talked about in each of the two testaments. And the angel of the Lord is that representative of the Word in the Old Testament. So that when Moses sees the burning bush, the angel of the Lord, that's the Word before he has become flesh into Jesus. So when Jesus is praying to his Father, he's praying to is God. When he's baptized by John, the Holy Spirit is going to enter into him. And so you have the same beings. You just have to dig a little bit deeper to understand that they're talking the same doctrine, that's talking the same principles. So yes, the God of the Bible is the same, Old Testament and New. The Holy Spirit is the same, Old Testament and New, and the Word is the same being, only made flesh through Jesus, so that he could atone for the sins of the world. But he's the one who, when God spoke in the Old Bible, created everything through the Word.
I agree. So before we go back into the chat room, I have a question of my own. So when we come to these Catholic and Christian saints that are able to do some of the things that Christ did in the Bible, right? To me, this is a very, very weird line we're walking here when we're talking about people resurrecting the dead and all of this, right? So from my research, especially me coming from an Italian background who's heavily merged with the mystery schools and Roman Catholicism and all of this, as a young child, I started hearing about some of the things that the saints did. And then when I started to dive into the deeper information about the stories, this didn't look like it was from God. This looked like it was from Nephilim and occult intelligence or knowledge that was infiltrated into these people to make it look like it's from like Christ or like God. Because even when you have somebody like Saint Neri, right? Saint Philip Neri, he was in the catacombs of beneath Rome and Saint Sebastian. And all of a sudden, while he's at this tomb in the catacombs, this fire entered into him and expanded his heart. And then after this, he's converting thousands of people all over the world. He's able to resurrect the dead and all of this stuff. So like, and what came to me at that moment too, when I was reading about it, is I imagined him actually picking up a scarab stone out of the coffin, and some kind of fire, blue fire, came out of it and entered him into him. And with Philip Neri, when he died, they found that his chest was expanded. He had broken ribs. Something entered into him and enlarged his heart, and he would always a fire would be inside him. When he would start preaching, people would start trembling around him. Right? There was all this weird stuff going on for him. And maybe, Nephilim, Rephaim spirits that we're talking about entered into these beings so they can convert the masses. Right. And they can bring the new church of the Nephilim, which is most likely after Vatican II, it really ushered in.
So we know that both the Holy Spirit can provide power, as depicted with the disciples, that Simon the sorcerer, who also was very powerful and a magi, saw how powerful it was and was actually trying to figure out how he could get that power from Peter.
Now, this is not Simon Peter, is it? This is Simon.
Simon the Magus is different than Simon Peter, yes. But they have this interplay because of the power that Peter and some of the other disciples are interplaying, and he wants to get some of that. So we know there's power on both sides, right? And we also know that knowledge is neither good nor evil. It's how it's used. So we always sort of have to keep, how is that power or knowledge going to be used? It's probably going to take you to the vine or the source of what is that being either good or evil. And as we roll that forward to Christianity, and after Constantinople, not Constantine, merges Mithraism and Sol Invictus and maybe some Egyptian religions into the state-sponsored religion that's going to have the veneer of Christianity on it. That's when we see this universal sort of religion that's designed to unite the Roman Empire. And within that new homogenization of these religions that's designed to pacify everybody that's out there, you have Gnostics who are very upset at the time, even with this, because Christianity is going to have sort of that sort of upper leg, but it's still going to have a lot of flavors of Gnosticism, and they're going to be persecuted. So they will go underground. And one of the places they find safety is within the builder guilds. We're going to build all of the churches right through to the Gothic cathedrals and things. And it allows them to have a need by the church and to mold within the church and have a veneer of Christianity, but will still be practicing their polytheist religions and ancient beliefs, just as many of the Druids did that in Celtic Christianity. And these are the orders that are known in Catholicism, whether it's Franciscans or it's Benedictines or Cistercians or, you know, the latest incantation in the 1930s with Opus Dei, which is sort of Masonic Catholicism order as they're known within Catholicism. These have their roots in the Essenes, who worship the fallen angels, wouldn't give up their names by even through torture. They developed the knowledge, they guarded the hidden knowledge. They're the basis for the organizational structure of the Freemasonic organization as we understand it today. And we're the first monastic order in the West, which it was based on the monastic orders out of Buddhism and Hinduism further east. And so one ought not to be surprised that you're going to have a lot of Gnostics that are going to become saints because they're going to say we're using the power that doesn't violate the laws of creation and for good with things that aren't, and they're trying to get them to follow within their sort of belief structure and their slant on how they want to present Christianity as part of their religion, which is the whole purpose of Gnosticism and the end time universal religion, to have it all as one religion and to try and get people to believe that it's the same God, it's the same religion, they're just different branches. So when I see saints that are venerated, I really want to know what they're venerated for. And if that doesn't sound good to me, then I'm thinking that's probably a Gnostic. And I'm not saying that in an evil way. I'm just saying they're doing what they think is right in their belief system. I just disagree with it. And I think we ought to be very careful of how that power is used and who they're representing and who they say they're representing. And we need to discern through that.
Yeah, it's interesting too, is, I mean, because if there could be negative influence, of course there could be good influence.
Yes.
Right. But you got to think, why would an angelic being need to resurrect this one specific human from the dead?
They don't need to do that.
It wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
So, but I do think maybe there are archangels, maybe like Michael and stuff, that might influence us in some other ways on a bigger level.
Yes.
You know?
And so what happens to receive that power, and I think there's two types of possessions. One's not as obvious as the other. There's this typical demonic suppression that is not symbiotic, and it's trying to suppress the host is fighting back. But let's say you're wanting to bring in a demon to give you more power and more knowledge. I don't know who's going to have the upper hand in that struggle, but it's going to be a little bit more symbiotic, and there's probably going to continue because that individual's getting some sort of reward there. It's like a counterfeit of the avatar process, which provides tremendous power of the god to the avatara, just as Buddha was thought to have an avatar of Vishnu, right? That's
a good point, because many people will claim, especially in occult information and in the past, you'll find dozens and dozens of books of, Horus is the new Christ. Dionysus is the same story as Christ, and all of these people what's happening is that Christ, I think, was put as a savior from God, but these fallen angels are using the same knowledge and intelligence and technology as God. Yes. To create these avatars. They had because they're their messengers. Who would carry out the acts of God when he has, it would be the messengers of God, right? So if they're using some of this stolen knowledge of God in a way, without his permission, they would be using it to create their own avatars. So yes. When I look at Jesus, I look at him as an avatar from God almost, right? He's a savior for our race. But with these other ones like Dionysus and all of these other ones, I feel like it's stolen angelic intelligence using that same knowledge, right?
And when you look at the shamans and the magi and magicians and the white faces that they like to paint with, that is another sort of indication. Now, they may be in more of a symbiotic demon possession, but they're receiving power to do these things. So
you think that the word shaman came from shamash? I always thought that was interesting.
I thought there was always a connection there. Yeah. I mean, I haven't found it, but it's too coincidental not to be there. So, and it could be part of Shemaim too, the heavenly ones. Because Shema is the singular, and just to finish it with consonant would be, simple sort of alliteration. But
Shamash is like a sun god, typically, right? It's typically,
And biblically, we get some of this, so that we understand. If you're Christian, I'm not preaching polytheism. I'm just saying I tend to look at what does the Bible tell us about this, and how does it substantiate some of the things that we see in polytheism and what they believe and what they do. And so we have Satan, for example, who enters into Judas to give him the courage to betray Jesus. So we know he can do that. He can be an avatar and have an avatar. And he may have done the same thing with the serpent or the Nakash in the time of Eden, because Satan's not the one that's punished. It's the whole species of the Nakash, of the serpent, that is punished, losing the legs, the intelligence, the speech, the whole bit, right? And we also have spirits that are present that, nag people like King Saul. And we also have spirits that we see that are giving power to, like Simon the Magus, Simon the sorcerer. A sorcerer is somebody who is in the occult and is a priest of the polytheist and able to do great powers. So there seems to be that sort of symbiotic relationship that provides that power that we're given examples of to the polytheist religions. And then we have that awful war within an oikantarian, a dwelling place for the spirit, the soul, and the body, which is the physical world. And the spirit is part of another dimension and heaven. And that is a war that's going on because it's a takeover and a usurping and trying to have the demon spirit suppress that human being so it can have a place of rest and interact again in the world.
People are loving this actually in the chat room, Gary. They're saying this is amazing. People are really loving this. And another bit of information to piggyback on what you're saying is especially about the church and a lot of these saints, is look at the spots that they decided to build their churches at. I mean, some of these spots, I mean, are so so soaked for generations and generations in Nephilim and occult in knowledge and rituals. I mean, there's spots, for people that don't know, there's spots where there's underground streams of water where they used to have Roman orgies that now churches are built on top of them. One of them, I think, is the Reims Cathedral. Right, the Reims Cathedral in France. There was a Roman bath underneath it, and Saint Etienne Church. There's water flowings in these crypts underneath these churches that were spots of Roman orgies. Roman
Notre Dame.
orgies.
What about Notre Dame?
Notre Dame.
And all of and many of these cathedrals. I mean, first of all, is that why, if you are totally opposed to what those religions were about, what they did, why would you put one of your holy sites on there? Like, you thought that you could clean it after it's been defiled?
They claim they consecrated and exorcise it and consecrate it. But I mean, like you're saying, Notre Dame.
Was that picked by the Gnostic moles because it's a holy place to them? And then did they build cathedrals, whether it's the Gothic art or the old Gothic or the Romanesque style, and then decorated them with all of the different polytheist symbols that are in there? There's gargoyles and all sorts of things all over these churches. It was not to honor what's written in the Bible. It was done to honor the hidden religion that was molded in underneath, who controlled the builder guilds and were molded into Christianity for safety, and were part of that homogenization with Constantine at the start of the Christian church as the state church, and it moved, and that's a different church than what the Jerusalem church was all about, right? This was a complete change in terms of how the church was set up, in terms of its hierarchy as a sort of a army type of Saba host that we were talking about earlier, organizational structure, to the flat, vertical, decentralized version that the Christian church was, which was based on the Hebrew church. And so you have a complete changeover, and then you have a bringing in of all of this other stuff to pacify the rest of the empire.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, I mean, Notre Dame de Paris is built right on top of the spot where they worshipped and sacrificed to Diana, and the ancient Virgo Virgin, right? This is the I think that
and Our Lady, and Our Lady isn't talking about Mary, Mother of Jesus. It's going to be Mary Magdalene and all the mother goddesses, the Queen of Heaven,
the Asherahs. The Asherahs and all of this. Yeah, the Asherahs, the Sekhmets, the all of this, right? Yeah, and Notre Dame in Paris, I mean, under the choir of the cathedral there, they actually found what they call it's spelled Nautes, the Nautes pillar.
Oh yeah.
Right? This is this is a spot where, I mean, actually, I think it was a gift by sailors to the Emperor Tiberius, because it was like dedicated to Jupiter and all of these Cernunnos and all of this, right? So even the Chartres Cathedral, which is also one of the Notre Dame cathedrals, it's on the exact spots where Druids worshipped and sacrificed to the Virgo Madonna. And there's megalith underneath that cathedral that have amazing, and they even have this labyrinth, like the dragon's labyrinth, on the floor of the cathedral.
Yeah, and there's ley lines that run through most of these major worship sites, and then there's astrological and astronomical alignments where they're built.
Archaeoastronomy.
So there's a whole bunch of arcane knowledge, so to speak, that's built in there. None of that is biblical. All of that is part of the mystical religions.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's so true. And I mean, when you look at these Gothic cathedrals, they look like weapons. They look like technology, especially the bird-eyed view. And they have these rose portal sort of windows that they employed these Persian mathematicians to make, and the glass in the original windows are so intense that you need like a comet strike to hit sand to make that kind of glass. You need like a
and the use of the triptych windows, which is that typical three portals, right? The three different dimensions.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like 100 years later, they didn't even have the technology anymore to make these windows. The knowledge comes out of nowhere and then disappears. Although within the belief system is that's the knowledge that the Templars brought back with them from Jerusalem.
From Jerusalem, that was given to King Solomon to build the first temple, that came from King Tyr, the king of Tyr, Hiram, who had the knowledge passed down to him from the Dionysian builders, who received it from Pythagoras, who got the knowledge from Hermes, who got the knowledge that was hidden under the pyramids, written and stored there in 9 vaults and 36,525 books from Enoch, son of Cain.
Crazy, man.
And then was passed on to the Roman builder guilds that the Gnostics mold into to build the churches for Christianity. I mean, if you wrote this as a fiction, nobody would believe it.
True. It's true. It's true.
The Dionysian builders built all the great temples after the flood, all around the Mediterranean, all the great palaces. That's the building knowledge that has completely disappeared.
Yep, I agree. And there was another interesting where was this? There's another interesting I know it's up. There's a few questions, but I want to go in order. Here's another one. Do you think our junk DNA is actually our suppressed abilities?
Well, it certainly is unutilized. I guess that's what's being talked about there. There's so much potential in this, and we're taught this, whether or not it's in the Bible or outside the Bible that we're not using, just like we're not using the full capacity of our brain. So I think there's a lot of potential that was changed. And again, I look at that verse in Genesis 6:3, where you get the life shortened going forward to 120 years. So there would have been an editing or a change in that DNA in sort of a lot of ways. And we don't know exactly what that was. And who knows, maybe it was a limiting of what our capabilities could be based on what was done before the flood, to give us that opportunity again to fulfill the names that were written in the life we don't know. And another possibility is that DNA is there to be used down the road. And again, both sides will talk about this in a different way. One, to be physical gods in the universe, immortal gods, to bring that back and utilize it, and have that second pillar of godhood, which is infinite knowledge, which you're going to have that DNA to build in what you can handle for information and control. And as I talked about earlier, there's the body that Jesus was resurrected in that is different than what we have, the one that Thomas touches and then physically goes to heaven where a physical body can't be. And that's the body that we're promised in the future time that can go between dimensions, so that when you have a new heaven and a new earth built at the end of Revelations, this is the sort of combined DNA, spiritual and physical, that is combined into one sort of dimension, I think.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Another thing that we were talking about too is the death transformations of the pharaohs. What I was finding is very interesting connections, because I was looking up certain encounters that we had on the planet that were these bat type humanoids.
Yep.
Right. And then a lot of them coincide with ancient Egyptian tombs being uncovered.
Oh yeah.
You know, so like when we had in 1903, there was this bat humanoid encounter in Van Meter, Iowa, right? And then that was the same year Queen Hatshepsut's tomb was uncovered. You know, and then we had this in the 1960s in you know, we had these Mothman sightings. This is the same time they were having a discovery in Egypt, and also they were having a revival of the cult of Aten Church in Chicago at the same time. And then Chicago ended up being a spot where a lot of these weird bat beings are, and even in Puerto Rico now, there's these weird reptile beings being seen, and gargoyle beings. So do you think that it's possible these are actually transformations of pharaohs?
No, I don't think so. I think they're, I mean, unless they're able to recreate their body somehow, which, I mean, we'll leave that sort of as seems more likely is just as you have giants that look like serpents, just as you had giants that looked like birds, as in the Tengu and the Anunnaki, which would have been the one face of a cherubim, as opposed to wearing four faces in the physical world, that created offspring that looked just like them. Just as you have lion men of Moab and Gad and all these lion men that are depicted in Egypt and in Sumeria by different names like the Urmahulu and things like that. You have out of the Kishamaya, the Xibalba, and the Xibalba are more sort of owl-like, so in the same kind of thing as an offspring demigod as the Tengu. But there's one specific branch that's called Camazotz, Camazotz. And if you Google it, you'll get an image that probably comes up that shows like a Batman suit of armor. This was the house of the Batmen in the Xibalba that were a demigod.
This is the Popol Vuh. In the Popol Vuh.
Yeah, in the Popol Vuh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So when you look at it, and that's sort of the house of the bats. And so and that's the whole imagery that Batman is doing, right? As portraying superheroes of ancientology. So if somehow Nephilim have survived, somehow dogmen have survived, if somehow lionmen have survived, then why not some of the bird Tengu or the house of Camazotz or some sort of descendants thereof? So I would look at the consistency of that and say, I think if that's happening, it's probably of that one of those several kinds of violations against creation that are sort of under that umbrella of Nephilim that include different kinds of Nephilim, little people, let's say the scorpion beings that Tiamat would have created with the Akrabamaloo or the Gerdabaloo, which are the same things that crawl out of the abyss following Azazel in the end time, same descriptions. There's so much that those types of goddesses created. Bast is another one that created several different kinds. Every polytheist culture kind of has that multiplicity creation of these combinations between humans, gods, and animals somehow. And some of it, I think, is done through just plain old DNA manipulation, because you get that chimera effect, like with King Hababa of the Cedar Forest. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about, the king of the woodland in Etruscan history that was so similar in the accounting to King Hababa of the Cedar Forest of Mount Hermon.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, what also led me to talk about the pharaohs like that is because a lot of these like granite tombs are found empty, and then you have a lot of this information where it seems that they were adding something to the mummy to make him become more at the moment of death, like a metamorphosis. You have the scarab beetle, rolling the bacteria in the dung until something metamorphoses out of it, with wings. So, it was making me wonder, is like, were they ingesting something, or preparing the body so at the moment of death, they become this metamorphosis.
Yes. And some of them certainly could. And, I look at that word siren that, I think you and I have talked about, on shows past as, it comes out of Middle East history, but also comes out of Greek history and also out of the book of Enoch as being the women who mated with the fallen angels. They become sirens. And typically you get sort of a sea or a mermaid sort of depiction to that as transforming somehow, obviously with some help, if that's indeed what happened, into these transformed beings. And, I was looking through and I just came across it as I was doing some of the research on my book, and I wasn't looking for siren. I was looking for Sisera, and I saw the word siren in Strong's Cyclopedia, which was done in the 1860s and is basically all the definitions as they provide for Strong's concordance for the Old and New Testament. It's got siren in there. It's got a picture of a siren. It's talking about some of these different areas where it was worshipped and the source of it. And it had wings like an angel on it with a human female head and with birds' legs and feet. And I'm going, they don't say how that depiction was created or what the thought was, but that's just how they showed it as being depicted. And I'm thinking, okay, those women died.
Yeah.
They're alive again somehow afterwards. They have this form, all of these different kinds of forms around the world that are kind of similar. But then this one directly related almost as being godlike for the sacrifice that they made and were rewarded for it in the physical world, but become a bit more chimera-like. Just bizarre. Yeah. Sorry I went down that rant, but it was just, I thought that was so odd.
Even the word siren, how close it is to Sirius.
Yes.
Right. It's very, very interesting, and another question we had, we'll wrap it up in a few minutes. It's interesting too, because this is very connected to, me, how I was born. I was born in the call. They're saying, do you think it's a possibility Christ was born in the call?
I didn't understand that. Can you run it by me again?
The call is the way I was born. The call, CAUL, is the amniotic sac when you're first born. This is actually how I was born. Okay. So I've talked about it by when I do shows by myself. I don't bring much about me up on when we do videos, but yeah, I was like my mother's womb, like my mother's water never broke.
Right.
Like I came out, I was had the call around me, and it's looked at as the oldest I could find it, at least, is the net of Neath, where she fishes
Oh,
the
yeah.
child out of the cosmic
Yep.
water, or the veil of Isis,
Right.
right?
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
you
I
know
mean,
how
we don't get details of that in the Bible in terms of how Jesus is born. What we do know is that body is a designed oikotarian, a soul and a body, so that the word can enter into it, and it's the Holy Spirit that creates that oikotarian in Mary. And if people don't know where I get the word oikotarian from, that's the word that is only used twice in the New Testament. It comes out of Greek. It's used in Jude 1:6, where the angels who left their habitation. It's the word habitation as it's called in English, and that's the Greek word oikotarian, which means a dwelling place for the spirit. So they left their dwelling place for the spirit and came to earth. And so to be able to interact properly in earth, they needed an oikotarian, which is why they developed a body that obviously had DNA that could reproduce offspring from that. And we get the second use of that word in 2 Corinthians 5, in the house in heaven, which is that dwelling place for the spirit again, right? That we're promised. And because we have a dwelling place in the spirit with the soul and the body, but the spirit comes from heaven. And when you start to understand that, you understand how angels through the avatar effect can dwell within that and share that oikotarian and add power, or you could have a demonic possession that suppresses, because there's two spirits occupying one oikotarian. And so the body that is provided for Jesus is that dwelling place for the spirit that's not created from sex, right? It is pure. And so everything in that process forward to his full delivery would be important and pure as the Word made flesh, who is the creator of all things at God's command. And I don't know whether all of that would make it more, but whatever happened would be, I think, in that sort of line, that everything would be pure in the process all the way through.
Yeah, that's a great answer. It's funny, one of these people's names right in the chat room is Aphrodite Rose Starfire.
Wow.
And we're talking about drinking the Starfire, they're right in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the rose and probably the dog rose, probably.
That's one of the biggest occult symbols that you could find.
Yep.
Right. It's
and the lily should be in there too somewhere. It should be with all of that. But
right, the lily, the water lily rose. It was so also Cynthia Wood out there. Shout out. I know Robert passed away this morning, late last night, and shout out to my friend Robert. Cynthia's in the chat room as well, her husband. Really unexpected, and much love to you guys. So there's what else do we have? Did they do chromosome analysis on the shroud, and Jesus had only one X chromosome? That's a question. I think that's a question.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of small samplings on the shroud, and each one sort of creates, well, we need to do it more because we're getting contradictory or contaminated information from each of those kinds of samplings. And so and some people have actually said, and I've never confirmed that it said that it's Rh negative blood. We don't know whether the shroud is from Jesus or not. We don't know whether or not it is, as some of the datings would indicate, that it is from the time of the Templars, or as in some of the other substances that some of the studies have found, but not all, that they get plant substances and things like that go back to the Middle East in the time of Jesus. And again, nobody at this point in time can explain how we get the image of the shroud on the shroud, whether or not that's from the resurrection or it's something out of the sciences and the alchemy and the thing of the occult mysteries that could have created as well, that they're always trying to create immortality and control it. So we don't know where that is. There's sort of a long lineage that you can follow throughout history that might suggest it. So my opinion on the shroud is simply, I'm agnostic on it one way or another. I find it all fascinating. I find it all interesting, but I can't take it back biblically to make that sort of connection. And the concern I have with it is it's used for idolatry from a Christian perspective, just as bones for the saints and things are.
Yeah.
And I find that not quite Christian, so to speak. And I do not think that Jesus really left a whole lot of things. And he took his clothes with him too. So that doesn't mean he took the shroud with him, but one would think that because it's so important in the worship and the pure worship of Judaism, which it was at that time, because Christianity was yet to be born. It was the start of the birth with the resurrection, that idols were forbidden, period. And they would leave nothing like that unless it was placed into the Holy of Holies, right? When, of course, the ark was gone there. So the only thing that was put into the ark were a couple of things, but we don't even know where the ark is today. So, I mean, that can't be properly utilized, but it's not Christian at all to idolize anything. And if that was sort of proven to be Jesus's actual shroud, then I can only imagine what type of idolatry that would bring about, which would not be proper. I think it would also bring about, oh, that's great because we have a confirmation of Jesus. But I look at the things always from that good and evil and the knowledge aspect. Is it going to be used for good or is it going to be used for evil? And if Jesus is also Alpha Omega, as God is, then they wouldn't leave something to be used for evil.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good answer. And also, we had Jenny Medley. She had a question. I want to get back to her original question because she had re-asked it. Also, thank you, Susan, for your super chat. I really appreciate it. So Jenny wanted to know about if we're at the time as the birth pains of the Bible, with the volcanoes and everything going on and the underworld rising. Do you think this is like the time that we're in now? Do you think earthquakes and volcanoes will be getting worse and worse? Are we in the birthing pains talked about in the Bible?
Yes. So the verses that are being talked about are in Matthew 24 and in Mark 13. And it comes just as Jesus is starting to talk about the signs of the time. And the birth pangs are one of these overarching signs, which is called the beginning of sorrows. And you take sorrows, it all goes back to birth. And the birth pains that go throughout it. So when you see birth pangs in the New Testament or sorrows in the Old Testament and birth pangs, they're all used for the most part in that prophetic sort of understanding. There's some examples to define the birth pangs in the Old Testament, but they're designed to also connect with Old Testament about the time of sorrows that's talked about in Matthew 24. So the two other overarching signs are the days of Noah, which immediate follows the fig tree generation. And so all of this will come to pass in the fig tree generation, as Jesus tells us, like the earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. He's pretty absolute on this. And the fig tree generation in prophecy typically applies to the southern kingdom as the fig tree or the fig. And the vine typically is the northern kingdom of Israel that was lost after the time of the apocalyptic war for the northern kingdom in the time of the Assyrians in 721 BC. And the fig tree generation is that key meaning that just as Jesus destroyed the fig tree before he finished off his commission, that they were going to be destroyed. And when you see that fig tree blooming again, because Judea was dispersed in the diaspora with the Romans, in 70 AD, not that long after the crucifixion, that Jesus had also prophesied that all of these things are going to take place. And so I think we are in the fig tree generation. And I would say that prophecy, end time prophecy, has a requirement of the fig tree Judah possessing Jerusalem, which they took in 1967. So if that's the case, then we're in the last generation, and that would indicate a generation in the Bible is 40 years, as the book of Numbers talks about, 70 years as what the Psalms talk about, and or 120 years as what Genesis 6:3. So we don't know what the exact period for the length is, but I do believe we're seeing the increase of those sorrows, which are earthquakes, which are wars and rumors of war, which are pandemics, and which is pestilence. And you might want to even include the raging of the seas, and that Luke talks about in his accounting of the end time disasters. And those are going to increase as we move along in that fig tree generation. They'll happen more often, just as birth pains do, and they'll get stronger just as birth pains do, culminating with the opening of the seals, where they are the same catastrophes. And I think they're all man-made, contrived catastrophes, just as the current pain of pestilence seems to be contrived and created, and that that destroys 25% of the world. And then the trumpets destroy 33%, so getting stronger still. And then the wrath bowls would be 100%, and no flesh would be saved unless Jesus steps in. So yes, the simple answer is I think we are. We're not in the last 7 years. We can maybe see it on the horizon. We don't have a universal government yet. We do not have a universal religion yet. And we do not have the Jewish people starting their sacrifices of the Torah on a wing, an extremity, or an overspreading of the temple, as the different English translations will talk about in the book of Daniel, have being started, which starts at the signing of the 7-year covenant that's going to be negotiated by the Antichrist, who is yet to receive power, which will happen 3.5 years later.
And then we haven't seen the mortal head wound happen either.
No, we have not.
No. So
we haven't seen the abomination. That's so, yeah. So there's all of those things. So we want to be careful not to get ahead of the chronology, and people who do exact predictions are generally wrong. But I think we're in the fig tree generation, but there's a lot of things and obstacles yet to take place.
Yeah, and I think it is at a constant acceleration rate. So it could go, we can have these like quantum leaps of change with certain events, right?
Typically, prophecy is fulfilled and happens quickly through catastrophes. But these, I think, are unique to be man-made catastrophes through that free choice concept that we were talking about earlier.
That's interesting. Another question that they had was thoughts on Mazzini. Now, I know what I can add. Mazzini is, basically the where we get mafia from, right? That's like, and I know the mafioso or the mafia, they have the initials were actually made out of certain things. Like Mazzini is the M, Otorizza is the A, Furti is the F, Incendi is I, Avelinamente is A. Now, basically what that means is Mazzini authorizes arson, poisoning, all thefts, all of this. They called their crimes pavi, which is bread, because it was by how they lived. That was their bread through their crime. So I know he first called his society Oblinica or Oblinica, which it's comes from the Latin obolus, which means a spit or a spike. Or I beckon with my knife. I beckon with my spit, my knife. All right. So, what your thoughts on Mazzini? Is there anything you can add?
There's some things I wasn't sure what the dots were all about. What was that about, the dot of Mazzini?
The Mazzini, like with the is where the term mafia. And if you look at mafia, it has the word, the MAFIA, and also mafia. It comes right from the mother goddess, Ma. Yeah.
So here's the thing you need to know. Most people don't really sort of connect the dots on is mafia organizations are secret societies.
Yes.
And they're initiatory societies, and you have to be, in their terminology, a made man, right? Which means you're going to be basically at an adept level. You may not be at the highest level, but you are, a made man. And so it is set up like a secret society. And I find it very interesting that they work so well with politicians and the powers that they're always permitted to do sort of what they want. And I think they're there to cattle herd people in the same sort of globalist direction. But some of the more interesting connections are like the blood oaths that they take. Which is another very much an occultic thing. And it's that term. And of course, they have sort of that Saba army organizational structure to it as well. But, they have lieutenants and things like that. So it's sort of set up in kind of that occult kind of hierarchy as well, or a counterfeit occult hierarchy. And that term Godfather, when I look at the fallen angels creating Nephilim, I mean, they are godfathers of the race that they produced, right? And I just look at that, and I look at the connections of it as being a secret society and a bloodline secret society that sort of works in parallel with the other forces on the earth that affect it. And then you look around the world and you see like triads, which are run by the Li family, which is the bloodline of the Shah dynasty and all the Chinese dynasties that go back to the dragon creator gods. And Xi Jinping is, the XI is the Western form of the Shah dynasty, XIA, which is that Li family and that bloodline that goes back to the Pharaohs. And they have members who are the godfathers of all the triad organizations around the world. And so I always look at how things are set up and what they do, and that sort of tells me everything I sort of need to know about them.
I don't know if you can even see, even this book that I have, I don't know if you could see it here on here, but it says it's the Dragon Lady, the life and legend of the last empress of China.
Yes.
Last empress of, the dragon. It's called Dragon Lady, right? In that book,
Yeah.
So, and for those that don't know, even in with Mazzini and the Mafia, I mean, you had other organizations like the Camorrista and the Carbonari. I mean, Camorrista basically means a quarrelsome person, or a person that's quarrelsome, and Carbonari literally means charcoal burners. That's what it basically translates to. So that's very interesting in itself,
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have. Let's see. Do you want to do one or two more, or do you want to call it?
Yeah, we'll go right to the top of the hour.
All right, cool. All right, so we have. What can we do to strengthen our relationship with God? What should we be doing?
Well, I think you have to talk to Him
regularly. And it's not about yourself, right? Like a lot of people, when they pray, it's like, oh God, let me be okay tonight, or oh God, I want to do good on my test. Oh God, I need a good job. We shouldn't be praying for ourselves. It's about others and humanity in the world.
And helping yourself to be strong and do good works and things like that.
Yes.
And I think we need to dig deeper into Scripture so we understand it, because we're not going to get fed everything we need from the churches. We're going to get some good moral principles, for example, maybe not as role models, but we'll get some, they'll talk a lot about, the New Testament and doing good things, but they're not going to teach you anything about prehistory or prophecy.
Yeah.
And everything written in the book is about the resolution to the angelic rebellion, what we're intimately involved on. So if you want to get closer, you need to understand what God has left with us to understand the world that we're in. It's the only playbook that we get in this world where it seems upside down, that good things happen to bad people, as we talked about, and vice versa, and that this will just never sort of end. It's what you need to understand the world and understand everything else that is talked about as the wisdom of the world. You need a proper lens, at least from a Christian perspective, to understand who we are, that this is not the world we were created to be in. This is a process that we're going through, and that process is what you're going to need to understand, and understand that even the elect will be deceived if you're not getting close enough to God and understanding his word.
Yeah. All right. So the last question, this is a long question. This is kind of a long, it would take a really long answer, but we could touch on it real quick. How does Tartarus and mud flood fit into the biblical narrative?
Well, mud flood's an interesting...
Tartaria.
Yeah. Mud flood's an interesting theory, and I know it sort of rolls into Tartaria. I just did a show on Subconscious Realms, a small podcaster, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago on Tartaria, and I've not done a full show on Tartaria before. I tend to have a different approach on Tartaria than others. There's like these two different positions. One is it's all nonsense, and the other one it has all of the answers, and it's not polarized like that. It's a little bit more nuanced. And as with all things, you have to understand Tartaria in 2 different eras. You have Tartaria before the flood and Tartaria after the flood. And you think it's linked
to like an underground society as well, like an underground network of civilizations?
So the word is going to root in a Greek god named Tartarus.
Yeah.
Right. And a place named Tartarus, which is the word hell in the book of Peter. It's only used once. That goes back to Tartarus or Tartaru. And that's the abyss. That's where...
So would you equal Tartarus to Hades or Amenti or Sheol?
No, I would equate Tartarus with the prison. And Hades, Tartarus is in Hades in the Greek language, right? Just as the abyss is in Sheol in the Christian and Jewish understanding, right?
So it would be a prison inside of Sheol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So you have all of these empires because there's only 2 beings that are in the abyss. You have the giants and you have the fallen gods, right? And so in Tartarian and occult history, giants escaped out of Tartarus after the flood and into Scythia and created the Tuatha De Danann and the Aryan peoples. There's like 4 or 5 branches, and they are the pale-skinned ones, the blonde-haired ones with blue eyes, red hair with hazel eyes, same descriptions as the Rephaim and the Horim as they're depicted in the Bible. And they create several empires. Some of them go down into the Middle East and into Egypt and intermarry there. Some of them go into Persia and become the Aryan kingships that the Persian kings take their lineage back to.
Like Mount Kaf and Mount Kaf and all those
Some
places.
of them go over to Ireland and England as the Tuatha De Danann. Some of them go up the Nile into Romania, into Germany, into Russia, into sorry, almost knocked my earplugs out, into Russia and Sweden, and create those Tuatha De Danann legends. And so after the flood, we get several different empires that are created by the Tartarians, but typically people are talking about this Eastern Empire. And so when we look at the Eastern Empire, you have 2 different empires. You have the Ukrainian one that goes into Russia, and you have the Mongolian one that all take themselves back to Tartaria after the flood. So, the contemporary at that time described the Mongols as being white skin and red hair.
I think Genghis Khan had red hair.
Khan took his connected here. He took his lineage back to the Tartarians, and some say to even back to Og as being part of that Rephaim group. You have the Muscovites who were invaded by the Mongols, but they didn't look at them as foreigners, and they kind of accepted them on. So what I look and Marco Polo looked on the Mongolians as Scythians, and they had the metalworking skills like the Scythians. And the Scythians were horseback riders and created the chariot, which revolutionized war after the flood. And the Mongols were horseback warriors, and they were taller and more distinct looking than the Chinese were. So and people look at the Cossacks as the closest descendants of the Mongols, which is part of that Ukraine group where the Putyanin dynasty of Tsars came from, that Putin takes his lineage back through. And so I look at the Tartarian Empire as being part of some history that's been lost, but we just don't give it credit for the power and the size of the power that it actually had. But I don't get so far down the road on everything else, because when you start looking at architecture, whether it's pyramids or whatever else, you have to distinguish before the flood or after the flood in the two different periods. And everything to do with Tartaria, my advice would be start there. Because you get, in Romania, you get cuneiform writing that predates the Sumerian writing. It's like, depending on which researcher, it's 2700 to 4000 BC. But the general consensus is it predates cuneiform writing. And that would make it before the flood. And that was in Wallachia in Romania. And it's part of that whole Tartarian sort of understanding of the history. So it's a big topic, not something you can do, I think, quickly with one question. But hopefully, I'll I give a little bit of a flavor there in terms of how I approach it and how I need to fit it in terms of what we know.
Yeah, and we could probably do a whole show on it eventually. And it's interesting because all these, before we close now, all these ancient religions and ancient cultures are connected. I mean, look at the Vedics and the ancient Egyptians. You have like Amen Ra, and you have Om Rama.
Yeah.
Right. Om Rama, Ama. It's like the same stuff. You got some of the, stuff with the hymns to Osiris are just like Vedic hymns.
Yeah.
Right? Some of them are very similar.
And Osiris is Azar in the Sumerian language.
Yeah, we talked about this. Asar. Yeah. Right, and
and it's the Aryans who also settled the Indus Valley. And so in Zoroastrianism and in Hinduism, you got a crossover of the same gods that are almost spelled identically in the same positioning. And I mean, so it's all interconnected.
I want to thank everybody out there in the chat room as well. You guys were amazing today. We had a whole bunch of chat room participants, great questions, great feedback, and great commentary in the chat room today. Thank you so much. And of course, we got to thank Gary Wayne for spending his time with us today. Gary, there's half a dozen people at least that said they have your book in the chat room that I saw that they're reading it. So we got a lot of fans in there, and you're one of my highest recommended. They love when we get together. Everybody loves when we get together. So I really appreciate you spending time with us today. And I'm looking forward to having you back on soon. Thank you for coming around.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully we answered some questions and maybe we raised a little more curiosity. That's always the goal. So
yeah, and I love when I see books that you have that I have. I'm like, well, it's really great. People think of this as a class better than any school. When they in the chat room, they're like, wow, this is like better class than you can get anywhere else. So I appreciate it. This is great information. And I want to say thank you for spending your time with us once again, Gary. Everybody get Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Genesis6conspiracy.com. Mr. Gary Wayne.